How did you make your sister's petty behavior completely backfire? I went on what was supposed to be a simple spring trip with friends and my sister Sarah, a 5-day beach vacation in Miami that I had been planning for weeks. I had packed with obsessive care because I wanted everything to be right. The clothes, the shoes, the accessories, all chosen to look relaxed but polished. I had even spent a lot of money updating my wardrobe for this exact trip, because our friend Lauren was bringing her cousin Brooke, who worked at a modeling agency. There was talk of internships and opportunities, and I wanted to look like someone who took herself seriously without trying too hard. Sarah knew all of this. She knew how important it was to me, and she agreed to load the luggage into the rental van while I parked it outside our apartment. It seemed like the easiest division of tasks, and I never imagined that trusting my own sister would end up setting off everything that came next. When we arrived at the airport and started unloading bags, something felt off almost immediately. Everyone else grabbed their suitcases. Lauren had hers, Megan had hers, Rachel and Olivia were joking as they rolled theirs toward the terminal, and I stood there empty-handed, staring at the open trunk. My bright red suitcase was not there. My stomach dropped in a way I cannot fully explain. I looked at Sarah and told her my bag was missing. She widened her eyes and acted shocked, saying she thought I had already grabbed it, even though she knew I had been parking the van and never went inside after that. She shrugged and said I should have double-checked, that it was my responsibility to make sure my things were loaded, and if it mattered that much, I should have reminded her. Our friends looked uncomfortable and sympathetic, but we were already checking in, and there was no time to turn back. Sarah suggested I could just shop when we got to Miami. She smiled and said it would be fun, like a bonus adventure. She even joked that I could reinvent my whole look. It felt dismissive, but I tried to stay calm. On the plane, she kept making comments about how forgetful I was, how this was exactly like me. She told everyone that I was always scattered and needed to learn a lesson about being more organized. Megan finally asked how Sarah did not notice my red suitcase was missing when she loaded everything else, and Sarah laughed and said she was not my babysitter. There was a little smirk on her face when she said it, and that was when I first felt something twist in my chest when we landed in Miami. Sarah made a big show of lending me one of her cover-ups to wear from the airport. It was sheer and barely covered anything. She announced to strangers that her poor sister had forgotten her luggage, and how generous she was for sharing. At the hotel, I asked if I could borrow some clothes until I could shop. She said she only packed enough for herself, which I knew was not true because Sarah always She finally agreed to let me borrow one outfit for dinner, but only if she chose it. She picked a shapeless dress that was far too big. It swallowed me and made me look ridiculous. I felt humiliated, but I wore it anyway because I had no choice. That evening, Lauren's cousin Brooke arrived, and Sarah immediately launched into the story of how I left my suitcase at home. She framed it like a character flaw, something she had to constantly deal with as my sister. Brooke looked uncomfortable and said that things like that happen. Sarah laughed and said, not to everyone, only to people who do not pay attention. Later that night, I found out why Sarah had done all of this. Rachel told me quietly that Sarah had been talking to Brooke online for weeks, trying to impress her and secure an internship. She did not want competition. She wanted me to look messy and unreliable, so Brooke would never take me seriously. Hearing that made everything click into place. The forgotten suitcase was not an accident. It was a calculated move. The next morning, I tried to move on and go shopping, but when I went to pay, my credit card was declined. I checked again and again, confused and embarrassed. Then I saw the charges. Designer swimsuits, shoes, all purchased that morning. Sarah had taken my card while I was sleeping and maxed it out. When I confronted her, she acted casual and said she thought I said she could use it. She offered to lend me a little cash for the inconvenience, an amount that barely covered a cheap sundress from a tourist shop. Something in me snapped at that moment. I realized Sarah was not going to stop. She felt entitled to sabotage me, and I was done being passive. I decided she needed to feel what it was like to be undermined. While she was in the shower, I borrowed her phone and sent a message to Brooke from her account. I wrote that Sarah saw Brooke's agency as a stepping stone and wanted to move on to bigger ones, that she considered it small time. Then I deleted the message so it would not appear in her sent folder. After that, I went into her suitcase. Everything was meticulously planned. Outfits matched by day and activity. I mixed it all up. Tops with the wrong bottoms, shoes in different bags, jewelry tangled together. When she tried to get dressed, nothing made sense. She looked frantic and irritated, and for the first time since the trip started, I felt like the balance had shifted, and that was where everything truly began to unravel. The morning unfolded with a strange tension hanging over all of us. Sarah stormed around the room trying to fix the chaos I had created in her suitcase, her movements sharp and frantic as she pulled out mismatched clothes and shoes that did not belong together. She kept muttering under her breath while I sat quietly on my bed pretending to scroll through my phone. Every few minutes she would shoot me a look filled with irritation and confusion. She knew something was wrong but could not quite place it, and that uncertainty ate at her more than anger ever could. When we finally left the hotel to meet the others, she looked thrown together and uncomfortable. Her confidence visibly cracked, and for the first time since the trip began, she was not the one controlling the narrative at the beach photo shoot Lauren had arranged. The difference was impossible to ignore. Sarah stood out in the worst way. Her bright colors clashed harshly under the Miami sun, and her sandals did not even match each other, one light and one dark. Megan tried to hide her reaction by covering her mouth. Rachel stared at the sand, pretending not to notice, and the photographer kept squinting at Sarah as if trying to understand whether this was intentional or some kind of mistake. Sarah laughed nervously and tried to explain that she was experimenting with bold contrasts, but her voice shook and she kept adjusting her clothes. like she could magically fix them by tugging at the fabric. Brooke arrived halfway through the shoot, walking down the beach path with sunglasses perched on her head. She stopped abruptly when she saw Sarah, her eyebrows lifting in surprise as her eyes traveled from the clashing top to the mismatched shoes. Sarah noticed immediately, and her face flushed red. She straightened her posture and started talking faster, saying something about artistic expression and visual tension. Brooke nodded slowly without saying much, and I could feel the shift in energy. This was not the polished impression Sarah had been working so hard to create. When the photographer gently suggested that Sarah might want to change into something more cohesive for professional shots, she snapped her bag shut and hurried back toward the hotel, sand kicking up behind her as she walked away while Sarah was gone. Brooke came over to stand near me and Lauren. She asked casually how the trip was going, and Lauren gave a vague answer about beach weather and plans. Brooke then looked at me directly and asked about my luggage situation. I told her the truth calmly and without exaggeration, that Sarah had been responsible for loading the bags and mine was somehow left behind, even though it had been right next to hers, that she insisted it was my fault, and that my credit card had been used without my permission. Rachel and Megan drifted closer as they listened, their expressions shifting as the pattern became clearer. I did not need to dramatize anything. The facts were enough, and Brooke looked genuinely disturbed by what she was hearing. Sarah returned later in a navy sundress that actually fit her well, but the damage had already been done. Her hair was messy and her eyes were sharp with anger as she looked straight at me. She knew I had something to do with what happened, even if she could not prove it. She avoided standing near me for the rest of the shoot, keeping her body turned away like proximity itself offended her. Every smile she forced looked stiff and strained. The photographer tried to lighten the mood but nothing worked. Sarah could not relax, and her frustration showed in every frame. After the shoot we walked to a beachfront restaurant for lunch. The tables were set right on the sand under wide umbrellas, and the ocean breeze felt heavy with unspoken tension. Sarah positioned herself as far from me as possible, leaning toward Megan and whispering urgently. Megan looked uncomfortable and kept glancing in my direction, unsure of what to believe anymore. We had barely ordered when Brooke touched my arm and asked if we could talk privately. My chest tightened as I followed her away from the table, toward the railing overlooking the beach. Brooke told me she had received a strange message from Sarah the night before. My heart started racing, but I kept my expression neutral. She showed me the message on her phone. The words I had typed stared back at me accusingly. She said it did not sound like the Sarah she had been talking to online, that it felt dismissive and arrogant in a way that did not match their previous conversations. She studied my face carefully as she spoke, giving me space to respond. I shrugged and suggested maybe Sarah had been drinking, and said something she did not mean, adding that my sister could be very competitive when she felt threatened. Brooke nodded slowly but did not look fully convinced before she could say more. Sarah appeared beside us, her presence sharp and confrontational. She demanded to know what we were talking about, her voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. Brooke looked startled by the aggression, and I tried to say it was nothing important, but Sarah cut me off and asked Brooke directly if I had been talking about her. She crossed her arms defensively and kept pushing. Her intensity made the situation worse, not better. Brooke raised her phone and showed Sarah the message, asking if she had sent it. The color drained from Sarah's face as she read the words. She shook her head repeatedly and said she never sent that message, her voice climbing with panic. She insisted someone must have accessed her phone, and then she looked straight at me, fury burning in her eyes. The accusation hung in the air even though she did not say my name. Our friends began gathering around, sensing something serious was happening. Lauren asked what was going on. Megan reached out to touch Sarah's arm, and Rachel watched me closely, trying to read my expression. Sarah grabbed her phone back and frantically searched through her messages, her confusion turning into rage when she could not find the sent text. She kept repeating that she respected Brooke's agency and would never call it small, that she would never sabotage her own chances like that. Brooke listened quietly and then said she needed time to think about the internship situation with both of us. She walked away toward the beach, leaving a heavy silence behind her. The opportunity we had both wanted suddenly felt very far away. The rest of lunch passed in an awkward blur. Nobody knew what to say, and the easy laughter we had shared earlier in the trip was gone. We returned to the hotel, and I went straight to my room hoping to avoid Sarah. But not long after I heard pounding on my door. When I opened it, Sarah pushed past me, her face twisted with anger. She accused me of sending the fake message, her voice shaking as she spoke. I tried to deny it, but my guilt showed, and she knew immediately. We started yelling at each other. All the resentment and jealousy we had buried over the years exploded into the open. She screamed that I was manipulative, and I shouted back about the suitcase and the credit card. Our voices echoed down the hallway as doors opened and curious guests peeked out. Neither of us cared anymore. 2 security guards arrived and ordered us to quiet down, threatening to move one of us if we did not comply. We fell silent instantly, breathing hard and glaring at each other. After they left, Sarah stormed into her room and slammed the door, the walls shaking from the impact. That night dinner was painfully quiet. Everyone sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact. Lauren looked disappointed. Megan looked exhausted. Rachel kept staring at her plate. I felt terrible for dragging everyone into our mess. After we left the restaurant, Holly followed me outside. She asked me directly if I had sent the message, and I admitted it, explaining everything. She understood why I was angry but told me it was still wrong. That revenge had made me look just as bad as Sarah. Her words stung because I knew she was right, and as I went back to my room alone, the weight of what I had done settled heavily on my chest. I barely slept that night, my mind replaying everything that had happened over and over. The argument in the hallway, the look on Brooke's face, the way our friends avoided looking at either of us. When morning finally came, the sunlight through the curtains felt mocking. People laughing by the pool, outside, while I lay there feeling sick with regret. I knew I had crossed a line, Even if Sarah had started everything, I had become someone I did not recognize. Someone capable of lying and manipulation just to hurt back. That realization sat heavy in my chest as I forced myself out of bed and got dressed. I went down to the hotel restaurant for breakfast. Dreading the awkwardness, Kiana was already there sipping coffee and waved me over. She did not waste time with small talk. She said she had noticed both Sarah and I had been acting awful the entire trip. She was calm but firm, explaining she came on this vacation to relax, not to watch two sisters tear each other apart. She did not take sides or defend anyone. She made it clear that the constant tension was ruining the experience for everyone. Hearing that from someone so neutral hurt more than any argument with Sarah. Across the room, I saw Sarah sitting with Megan, her shoulders shaking as she cried quietly. Megan had an arm around her, and for a brief moment I felt a cruel sense of satisfaction seeing Sarah upset, but it faded almost instantly, replaced by guilt. Watching my sister cry in public because of something I had done made me feel hollow. Sterling came over and sat down across from me, his expression serious. He suggested that maybe Sarah and I needed to actually talk instead of continuing this silent war. He offered to mediate, and even though every part of me resisted, I agreed because things could not stay like this. Sterling went to talk to Sarah, and I watched her shake her head angrily, her mouth moving fast as she spoke. When Sterling came back, he told me she refused to talk, saying I was a liar and manipulator and she would not say anything to me until I admitted what I did to Brooke. I felt stuck. I had already confessed to Holly, but apparently that was not enough. The rest of the day passed with me completely excluded from group plans. Everyone went jet skiing and out to lunch together, and no one invited me. I sat alone on the beach watching families and couples walk by. The loneliness hit harder than I expected. Sitting there alone made me realize how much I had lost by focusing on revenge instead of enjoying the trip. I had spent money, taken time off work, and all I was bringing home were regrets and damaged friendships. When I went back to my room, I found a message from Lauren asking if I was okay, saying she wished the trip had not turned into such a mess. I apologized and thanked her for checking on me. She replied quickly saying Sarah and I both needed to work on our issues because the way we treated each other was unhealthy for everyone around us. That evening, as the sun set outside my window, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Brooke was standing there, asking if we could talk privately on the balcony. My stomach twisted because I knew this conversation was unavoidable. We walked to the end of the hallway where the ocean and city lights stretched out in front of us. Brooke leaned against the railing and said she had been thinking about everything, that something about the situation did not add up. Then she asked me directly if I had sent the message from Sarah's phone. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened and tears filled my eyes. I could not lie anymore. I admitted everything. The fake message, mixing up Sarah's outfits, all of it spilled out along with the truth about my luggage and my credit card. I told her how threatened Sarah felt and how angry I had been. Brooke listened quietly without interrupting. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, staring out at the water. Then she said she appreciated my honesty but that my actions showed poor character. She explained she could not offer opportunities to either of us because neither of us had acted professionally. Hearing that felt like a punch to the stomach. Brooke said she hoped Sarah and I could work things out because watching sisters hurt each other like that was sad. Then she went back inside, leaving me alone on the balcony. I stayed there for a long time feeling empty, realizing my plan to teach Sarah a lesson had only destroyed my own chances too. When I finally went back to my room, I cried harder than I had in months. Everything had backfired, and there was no victory in any of it. The next morning, I woke, knowing it was our last full day in Miami, and I decided I needed to apologize to the group. I could not fix things with Sarah yet, but I could own my mistakes. At breakfast, everyone was seated together. My heart pounded as I walked up and asked if I could say something. I apologized for my part in ruining the trip, admitted to sending the fake message and sabotaging Sarah's outfits. The table was silent as they listened. Some faces showed respect, others disappointment. Sarah sat frozen at the other end, unreadable when I finished and sat down. Sarah stood up without a word and walked out. The door closing behind her echoed louder than it should have. Reagan told me it took courage to admit what I did, but that consequences would follow. I knew she was right. The rest of breakfast passed quietly, and I spent the day trying to make amends, paying for lunch, offering help, suggesting activities. People appreciated the effort, but things still felt fragile that night at the final group dinner. The mood was lighter, but the tension between Sarah and me remained. Sterling gave a toast about friendship and forgiveness. Everyone raised their glasses, but Sarah deliberately skipped clinking with me. The small gesture hurt more than I expected. Later by the marina, she approached me and said my group apology was nice, but I still owed her a personal one. I apologized directly for the message and the outfits, waiting for her to acknowledge what she had done. She simply said okay, and walked away, leaving me standing there, realizing some apologies do not bring closure. They just mark the point where you stop fighting and start living with what remains. Holly came to stand beside me after Sarah walked away from the marina. She waited until the noise of the others faded before speaking, then told me quietly that Sarah had admitted something to her earlier that afternoon. My hands tightened around the railing as Holly explained that Sarah confessed she had deliberately left my suitcase behind, not by accident or distraction but on purpose. Hearing it confirmed out loud sent a surge of anger through me. Even after everything I had owned up to, Sarah was still refusing to take responsibility publicly. Holly went on to explain that Sarah felt justified because she believed I had always gotten more attention from our parents, more praise, more opportunities, and that she had been competing with me for years. In her own head I wanted to argue, to explain how unfair that was, how none of it excused stealing my money or humiliating me, but Holly gently stopped me. She said I could not control whether Sarah ever apologized or took accountability. I could only control my own behavior going forward. She reminded me that I had already done the hardest part by admitting what I did wrong even when it made me look bad. And that mattered, even if Sarah never matched that effort. I nodded, though the frustration sat heavy in my chest, because part of me still wanted justice. Still wanted Sarah to admit she started this. But I was starting to understand that waiting for that might keep me stuck forever. When we returned to the hotel that night, the distance between Sarah and me felt larger than it had at the beginning of the trip. She walked ahead with Megan while I lagged behind with Holly and Lauren. No one said much, and when we reached our rooms, I lay awake listening to the muffled sounds of the city outside, thinking about how fast things had fallen apart. The next morning was our travel day, and the airport felt quiet and heavy. The group spread out through different rows on the plane, conversations minimal, laughter gone. I stared out the window as the city disappeared beneath the clouds, feeling like I was leaving behind more than just a vacation. When we landed back home, goodbyes were quick and awkward. Lauren hugged me and said she would text later, her voice tired. Megan waved but did not linger. Sarah walked past me without a word, not even a glance. I dragged the cheap suitcase I had bought in Miami toward the exit, feeling ridiculous and drained. The drive home with our parents was uncomfortable. My mom kept asking if we had fun, and I answered vaguely. My dad watched the road silently. Clearly sensing something was wrong once home, I went straight to my room and unpacked the few clothes I had managed to buy. The sundress looked even worse under my bedroom light, and I shoved it to the back of my closet. 2 days later, my credit card company called about suspicious charges in Miami. I had to explain that my sister had used my card without permission, which triggered a fraud investigation, paperwork, and phone calls. When the company contacted my parents as secondary cardholders, everything came out. They called both Sarah and me into the living room for what they called a family meeting. My parents listened as we explained our sides one at a time. My dad asked me to go first, so I told them about the luggage, the credit card, the sabotage, and the internship situation. Then Sarah spoke, admitting she left my suitcase on purpose but claiming I deserved it because I always got more attention. She admitted using my credit card but said she thought I had said it was okay. My parents did not yell, which somehow made it worse. They looked disappointed. My dad finally said that whatever was going on between us had been building for years and we needed professional help. He scheduled family therapy, and neither of us argued. The first therapy session was uncomfortable. We sat in stiff chairs while a calm middle-aged therapist asked us to describe our relationship. Neither of us could think of many positive things to say. The session turned into a list of complaints. The therapist listened and explained that our dynamic was rooted in long-standing competition and resentment, and that it would take time to untangle. Over the next few months, we attended weekly sessions, slowly unpacking years of misunderstandings. Sarah admitted she had always felt like the less favored child, like she was constantly trying to prove herself. I admitted I never knew she felt that way and always thought she was confident and unaffected. The credit card investigation eventually ruled in my favor, and Sarah had to pay the money back on a payment plan. She was angry about it but complied. Therapy did not magically fix everything, but it softened the edges. We stopped fighting constantly. We could be in the same room without tension. Sometimes we even talked about normal things like shows or work. 3 months after Miami, Lauren sent out invitations to her birthday party. Both Sarah and I were invited. I hesitated about going, worried it would be awkward, but Holly texted saying everyone wanted to see me. So I decided to go. The party was at Lauren's house, the backyard decorated with lights and music playing softly. I arrived a little late, nerves buzzing. When I walked in, I saw Sarah talking to Megan. Our eyes met across the yard, and we exchanged small nods before looking away. The night felt surprisingly normal. People laughed, shared stories, and for the first time in a while, I did not feel like the center of a problem. Holly found me near the drinks and told me she was proud of how I handled everything, that going to therapy showed real growth. Her words eased something tight in my chest later. In the evening, Sarah and I ended up standing near the food table, neither of us speaking at first, pretending to focus on snacks. Then she said quietly that maybe we should stop competing over everything in our lives. I agreed and told her we might never be close, but we could at least stop trying to tear each other down. She nodded, grabbed a cookie, and we stood there in silence for a moment before others joined us. Driving home that night, I thought about the Miami trip and everything that followed. How revenge felt satisfying for only a moment before it poisoned everything else. I had wanted to hurt Sarah the way she hurt me, and all it did was cost me opportunities, trust, and peace. Therapy was teaching us how to move forward slowly, imperfectly, but honestly. And even though our relationship would probably always be complicated, we were no longer actively trying to destroy each other, and that felt like progress in its own quiet way. The weeks after the birthday party settled into a quieter rhythm, nothing dramatic or explosive, just a slow adjustment to a new normal. Sarah and I were no longer openly hostile, but we were not close either. Our conversations were brief and careful, like stepping around broken glass. Therapy continued every week, and even when it felt repetitive or uncomfortable, I kept going because I could feel something shifting beneath the surface. Not forgiveness exactly, but awareness, the kind that makes it harder to pretend nothing is wrong. I started noticing how quickly competition had always crept into our interactions, even before Miami, and once I saw it clearly, I could not unsee it. At work, I threw myself into projects to distract myself from everything I had lost. The internship opportunity was gone, and with it, the version of myself who believed hard work alone guaranteed results. That loss stung more than I admitted out loud, but it also forced me to look at what kind of person I wanted to be moving forward. Someone who reacted from anger and insecurity, or someone who could walk away without needing to win. That question followed me everywhere, and slowly, my answer began to change how I handled conflict, not just with Sarah, but with everyone. Sarah struggled more visibly with the fallout. Paying back the credit card forced her to confront what she had done in a way she could not rationalize away. Therapy peeled back layers she had kept tightly wrapped for years. Resentment toward me, toward our parents, toward anyone she felt threatened by. Sometimes she came home angry and withdrawn. other times unusually quiet. And while it was not my job to fix her feelings, I learned to stop feeding into them. When she made passive comments, I did not react. When she tried to provoke competition, I disengaged. That boundary was new, and it felt powerful in a way revenge never had. Our parents watched the change cautiously. They never took sides outright, but they became more intentional about acknowledging us individually, praising effort without comparison, celebrating achievements without turning them into a scoreboard. It did not erase years of perception in Sarah's mind, but it softened something. And I realized that part of healing meant letting go of the need to prove who was right and who was wrong. Some wounds are not solved by winning. They are eased by stepping out of the fight entirely. Months passed, and the Miami trip started to feel less like an open wound and more like a scar. Still there, still sensitive, but no longer bleeding. Friends slowly relaxed around us again. Group plans resumed without the awkward tension that once filled every silence. Lauren invited us both to casual hangouts. Megan stopped looking like she was bracing for impact whenever we were in the same room. Holly remained a quiet anchor for me, reminding me when I slipped into old thinking patterns, when I started replaying what I should have said or done differently. She always brought me back to the same point, that growth is not loud, and it rarely feels satisfying in the moment. One evening after therapy, Sarah and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen, the house quiet, the air heavy but calm. She mentioned offhand that she had turned down an opportunity at work that involved competing directly with someone on her team. She said she was tired of feeling like she had to beat everyone to feel good about herself. The comment surprised me, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. I nodded and said I understood, and for the first time, our conversation did not feel like a negotiation or a defense. It was just two people acknowledging something broken and choosing not to make it worse. I would love to say that moment fixed everything, but it did not. Progress was uneven. Some days were easy, others tense. There were setbacks and awkward silences and moments where old instincts flared up. But the difference was that now we recognized them. We stopped mid-sentence. We changed direction. We chose not to escalate. That choice mattered more than any apology ever could, because it was repeated again and again, in small, quiet ways. Looking back, I can see how easily I justified my actions in Miami, how convincing it felt to tell myself that hurting Sarah was deserved. That sabotage was fair because she had done it first, but time stripped that logic down to its core. Revenge did not teach her a lesson. It did not restore my dignity. It did not protect my opportunities. It only multiplied the damage. It turned a bad situation into a defining one, and not in the way I wanted. Accepting that truth was painful, but it was also freeing, because it meant I did not have to carry that version of myself forward. I learned that boundaries are not punishments. They are protections. Walking away is not weakness, and silence is sometimes the loudest refusal to participate in something harmful. Sarah and I may never be the kind of sisters who share everything, but we are learning how not to destroy each other, and for us, that is real progress. The Miami trip will always be a reminder of how quickly things can spiral when pride and insecurity take the wheel, but it is also the reason we finally stopped pretending everything was fine. If there is one thing that stayed with me, it is this: becoming like the person who hurt you does not balance the scales. It just creates more damage to clean up later. Choosing to be better feels slower, quieter, and far less dramatic, but it is the only choice that actually leads somewhere worth going. And that lesson, as costly as it was, changed the way I show up in my life in ways no revenge ever could.